So I have brought you from energy, shown you how it reveals information and form, how we receive that information through different channels, our mind, the body, spirit. We've seen how there is a process of evolution that comes from the process of involution, how this energy comes into form and becomes embodied, the mind becomes embodied, and how it moves to internalize, to go on a journey of spiritual evolution, to heal both the individual consciousness and the species. I've shown you how you can work with these physical neural connections and chemical expressions of this body through metaphors, through the cube and tarot and astrology, and how these point to something much higher, much larger, the stars. And that's what we're going to talk about in this final video. It is called the large cycle of consciousness, the Yuga Cycle in the East. It is stored in our ancient traditions from Egypt and Mesopotamia, all the way through Greek, Roman, finally the Renaissance, and all the way back to Göbekli Tepe. I can show you how this was the story that mankind has been attempting to continue to tell as it was being unraveled and unveiled, and we were becoming able to utilize the biology and the access to information and story such that now we can fully understand what we were trying to say. And what we have been trying to say all along is so powerful and so large that I can't begin to share it with you in just one video, but hopefully I can get through to you to understand the gravity of what it actually is. So let's backtrack. When I looked at the cube, I could see that astrologically, there were patterns that were stored in the cube that also reflected the sky. They followed the same pattern within the cube as our zodiac follows. And what I mean by that is there are different formations that the zodiac takes. Throughout the year, the sun travels one way through the zodiac, and really we define it by a triplet. So it would be Aries, Taurus, and then Gemini. And then it would be Leo, Cancer, and Virgo, and so on and so forth. Ultimately, these triplets don't really tell the true story of humanity. They tell personalities and archetypes, stuff that we can pull on and draw from so that we can explore reality through language, narrative, and ultimately our own personal stories. But they don't tell the full grasp of what is really trying to be revealed. That doesn't happen unless you follow the precession of the equinoxes. And so the precession of the equinoxes is actually the pattern that the sun takes through the zodiac over a 26,000 year period. So during the year, it's a 12-month traveling one way. Over this great year, the precession, it travels 26,000 years over backwards what it travels over a normal year. Every 72 years, it moves 1 degree from one zodiac sign to the next in a backwards pattern. And when we understand the pattern from that perspective, and we realize that that is the same pattern that the consciousness cycle takes, what we begin to see through the meanings of the zodiac is actually the unfolding of the two hemispheres of our brain as it becomes more and more coherent in its experiences and ability to produce identity and relationship with the external environment. There's 4 phases that this goes through. There is the hunter, which is born out of Virgo and explored through Leo and Cancer, the king of the jungle or the emotional self. Then there is the hero, which is established once Gemini, these two hemispheres are established. Then it moves through Taurus, a domestication of it. And then ultimately Aries, the hero. Then it goes through the Hierophant, or the keeper of ancient wisdom. We are right smack dab in the middle of that phase. It began in Pisces, where we were given a brand new story through Christ, that his kingdom was not of this world. It was the higher embedded in mankind, the realization of higher consciousness within the being, everything we've just talked about in these videos. And it goes on to explore the next 12,000 years that will unfold. And we realize that the meaning that mankind chose to store within this longest manuscript we have access to is that mankind has been attempting and wants desperately to create a unified story so that we can begin to embark upon the greatest journey that we could ever imagine, the spiritual evolution of the species towards this higher awareness and a reclaiming of the kingdom here on this planet, a realization of the garden once again, so that we can begin to live in a more unified state, both externally, internally, higher, lower, male, female, all of these. We can have a coherently symmetrical experience that is individualized, that understands and has access to the all, and can begin to receive this greater information through the daily experiences of our lives. Now, this is not something that we have to wait to receive. It is already happening always right now through this process I mentioned called supernatural selection. We have a naturally selected biology that we operate from. Again, this is a miracle. No other species on this planet can have these types of deep conversations. And that was built through a process that we call natural selection. It's the bottom-up creative process where biology and genetics are being worked with through the environment. But there's a top-down process of creation. It is the conscious process of creation. It's the supernatural selection process of creation that use narrative and language and symbol to begin to work with the biology and the story that it's telling. Why? Because as we tell stories, we have emotions tied to those stories. And those emotions are tied to the neural networks and the chemical expressions of this biology, and ultimately the genetics that express within this biology. As we tell those narratives, it continually reinforces these patterns. As the environment begins to shift, as these ages change, like we talked about in the first video, what ends up happening is there's a shifting externally. And now the internal must move to begin to work with and match, begin to build models and networks that are in coherence with the external, or else there is too much suffering and stress and struggle. This is indicative of a very low expression of emotion. We know this because we have many models of emotion within our psychological models. And so what supernatural selection does is supernatural selection takes this ability for our species to create narrative and helps bring experiences to the biology, to this lower awareness. And as this lower awareness goes through the experiences, it begins to interact with these narratives. And as it sees the expressions that's happening, it can begin to understand, wow, I'm challenged here. And that gives an access to the top-down conscious force to begin to now work with, as the lower awareness surrenders, this lower awareness's ability to tell a story and tell it in a higher and higher way. As it tells the story in a higher and higher way, it begins to work with the subjective experience of this individualized reality. And we call that qualia. As the supernatural selection process begins to move forward through the spiritual evolution, as defined by the involution and evolution model, the lower awareness begins to realize things in the internal. And then it begins to work to actualize these things. And the way that it does that is to surrender in faith and begin to work with the pulls of supernatural selection instead of the pushing of the natural selection to try to claim a kingdom. It allows and surrenders, it moves through faith so that these stories can begin to be worked with. It surrenders its lower stories to begin to understand them in higher and higher ways. And as it does that, it begins to move to be set free from the lower fear that it was experienced by those lower narratives and the qualia and emotional expressions that were tied to them, and begins to experience more and more senses of joy. Despite what's coming to it, it doesn't mean that the experience has changed. It means that your story about it has. And so no longer are you looking for a piece of candy or something good to happen to you. It doesn't matter what happens to you. It matters that you are able to face it and you are resilient in the face of whatever comes your way. And in so doing, you realize your true power, the power of surrender, the power of faith. And you begin to move on the real journey. This journey teaches you to see with the eyes of the higher, to understand how these higher experiences can be had, not by going and achieving things, but by recognizing what is being delivered to you. And this reveals the real essence of who and what you truly are. And you begin to reconnect deeply with this higher and the source of all creation. And that is what the Yuga cycle defines we are participating in the next 12,000 years. And why I am encouraging you so deeply to begin to work with this work that I'm presenting. Because it will help you build a deep spiritual metaphorical language that you can use to begin to participate with the already always supernatural selection process that is taking place and has been taking place since the beginning of creation. And we explore all of this through the divine remembering. And so I, again, encourage you to engage. Get involved with the community, because this is not some spiritual frou-frou. This is not some strange scientific spin. This is actually working to reveal and build the one thing that will allow us to continually progress on this planet. It will help us build and reveal the thing that has been just outside of our grasp, just outside of humanity's history. All civilizations have been trying to create this and have failed at it, which is why they have failed and why we have to begin to build this at this time. We have to begin to create the unified human narrative. Because it is the narrative that will bind us. It is the narrative that creates the deep connections that's necessary. It's not going to be found in dogma. It won't be found in religion, and it won't be found strictly in science. We have to discover the truth deeply within each of us so that we can share it with others and they can discover it themselves. Because in that, we will find the truth. And it is this truth that we will begin to walk forward on this path. And we will be able to be in harmony and balance with this environment. And we will be able to withstand the great change and challenge that's ahead of us. It's a great blessing. We have had this story for a very long time. Humanity is ready to remember. And it requires you.